What's up guys, and welcome back to another episode of You Choose I Build, the £150 gaming PC challenge. Today's contestant doesn't need that much of an introduction. Well, that's not so true, he does need a bit of an introduction, but I'm going to allow him to do it himself.
You caught me editing my next video. I'm Paul from W&D Tech. Much like TechLabUK, we do tech content too. If you like this kind of stuff, then you should probably subscribe to us as well. But back to this video, we gave TechLabUK a parts list, and he's gone out and got those parts. And now he's going to go through the parts that we chose and list them individually. And hopefully ours is a good one. Bit of a crazy mix. Anyway, back to the studio. I've always wanted to do that.
Wait, that's not right. That's better. Now today's system may look very similar to the previous one, and that's because I'm actually providing the case and power supply for this challenge. Contestants only need to actually provide the internals, the bit that actually will affect the performance. And of course we need to thank our partners at TechWare for providing these cases. This one here obviously is a micro ATX case and is the TechWare VXN Evo. They've also provided us with a full ATX version of this case, the TechWare VXL Evo. So when somebody does actually come along with an ATX size board, the system will look very similar, but of course it will actually fit all of the parts in it. W&D Tech actually went in a slightly different direction with this system today, and it's a little bit of a weird one to be honest, because I've never actually built with this platform before. For the CPU, he decided to go for the i7-4820K. Now that is a 4-core 8-thread processor with a boost clock speed of 3.9 GHz, and it was released in 2013. Now that CPU is quite old, but it also does use a little bit of a unique socket here because it is an LGA 2011 socket, something I have never built before, and of course it needed a bit of a specialist motherboard for this. The motherboard that he chose was a bit of a weird one as well because it is an unbranded motherboard. It is a micro ATX format, but it's also pretty cool. It does support the CPU having an LGA 2011 socket. It has 2 DIMM sticks for, of course, DDR3 because that's only what is supported by this CPU. But it also does come with 2 NVMe slots. Now that is quite unique. I've never actually seen a little board like this on this socket with 2 NVMe slots before, but I could actually see them becoming quite useful if you were to build a system with this. For RAM, he played it safe here by getting 2 sticks of 8 GB of DDR3. That brings the total to 16 GB, and the RAM speed is 1866 MHz, so it should give this system a little bit more of a boost if it's fully supported. And he also played it safe when it came to storage. He actually went for a 250 GB SATA SSD, which is of course very similar to the previous system, but it will be enough to get this system up and running and get the tests done that we need to. When it came to graphics card though, he did go in a slightly different direction here. This graphics card in this system may actually look like the one in the previous build, which was an RX 580 8GB, but this one is a little bit lower on the scale. This is the AMD Radeon RX 480 4GB. I'm not sure whether that 4GB will really affect the benchmarks that much, but I'm sure we'll see when we actually start doing some gameplay. But with this system, he was on a very tight budget, so he had to go for whatever he could find. Of course, contestants also need to provide their own cooling solution, and because this one actually used a bit of a weird socket, he had to purchase something. He actually managed to pick up a pretty decent 120mm tower cooler from UpHere, so that actually fit perfectly fine, and it keeps the system nice and cool as well. Now I was a little bit dubious when I first got this parts list because it is a platform that I've never built with before. The CPU is a little bit unique to me, the socket is a little bit unique to me. Of course the cooler needed to be specific for that socket, and to be honest there isn't that many out there considering what he was actually looking for. He did send me a few links to coolers that just wouldn't fit this socket board, so he had to go back to the drawing board, and eventually he did find something that fit. But the system actually went together perfectly fine, there were absolutely no issues at all. But how much did he actually spend on all of these parts? For the Intel Core i7-4820K, he actually managed to pick that up from eBay for just £19.90. The unbranded X79 motherboard actually cost him £36.49 from eBay again. I thought that was actually a fantastic price on that board, and unfortunately when we did check the listing after I'd purchased it, they'd actually increased the price by quite a bit, so whether that was actually a mistake here or not, he got lucky. 16 GB of DDR3 actually cost him £18 from CEX. You can easily pick that up from anywhere here in the UK. The 250 GB SATA SSD cost him £11. That also came from CEX, which of course didn't leave him much of a budget for the rest of the system. He managed to pick up this really cool Sapphire Radeon RX 484 GB from eBay for £43.95. That was on a buy now, so anybody can pretty much pick them up for that nowadays. And this one is a little bit cool because it does have some RGB lighting. And then for the cooler, he did have to actually go new for this one just to make sure he got something that actually fit. he managed to get this UpHere 120mm air tower cooler from Amazon for just £18. Now that probably isn't the cheapest cooler out there, but many of them didn't support the 2011 socket, so he had to go with whatever worked at the time. This brought the total to £147.34p, so of course he is within budget, but he did spend a little bit more than our previous contestant in the previous video. So WND Tech did actually manage to meet the criteria of the challenge, building the internals of a budget gaming PC for £150, although he did actually go in a slightly different direction. The GPU only being a 4GB one compared to the previous video may actually affect the performance, but by how much? Well, there's only one way to find out. When it came to benchmarking this system, everything actually went perfectly smooth, and to be honest, due to the actual difference in CPUs here, we got a much smoother experience, although the average FPSs may be slightly lower across the board. In GTA 5, running at 1080p with a high preset, the game ran absolutely beautifully smooth, there was no major glitches, it was more than playable on the settings of this system, particularly with the configuration that we've got, so that was kind of actually a pretty decent win here. We managed to get an average of 65 frames per second with a 1% low of 45. Of course, that just meant that the game was more than playable and you could get a pretty decent experience out of it too. In Mad Max with a 1080p resolution and a high preset, this system managed to get an average of 138 frames per second with a 1% low of 93. This configuration provides a very high FPS experience here with no stuttering at all, and with the preset settings the game looked absolutely fantastic and it was just more than playable on this system. I don't actually have that much experience in this game as I've never really played it that much before, but I could easily complete the game end to end with this system here, so it wasn't too bad for the money that was spent. The Witcher 3 was a slightly different story though. Running the game in 1080p with a high preset again, we managed to get an average here of 61 frames per second with a 1% low of 41. The game runs very well on this system, getting an even better score than the previous, which was a little bit strange, and it was a much smoother experience in the high settings, so there was no need to drop them, and even with these the game looked absolutely amazing as well. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is a very well optimised game, and running it here in 1080p with a high preset again, we managed to get an average of 68 frames per second with a 1% low of 60. This means that the game runs beautifully smooth on this system with this configuration. It looked amazing with high settings, and even though it performed slightly worse than the previous system in terms of averages, it actually did have a better 1% low, which just made it a much more smoother experience all round. Doom Eternal is probably one of the most well optimised games in our test suite for this challenge, and there was absolutely no difference here with this system. Running the game in 1080p with a high preset, we managed to get an average of 85 frames per second with a 1% low of 63. The game runs absolutely amazing on this system, you could complete it end to end quite easily, and it had a near high FPS experience with the settings and it looked amazing too. A system like this is actually perfect for this type of game, so if anybody's out there looking to build a cheap system, this could potentially be an option for you. The last game in our testing is of course Cyberpunk 2077, and we added this one into the test suite just to really give these systems a bit of a push. Running this game at 1080p with a medium setting this time, we did have to enable FSR 2.1 with a balanced setting. The system only managed to get an average of 52 frames per second with a 1% low of 33. With these configured settings, the game actually runs quite fine. It's not the smoothest of experiences, but you could actually play it, and it looked reasonably good too, so I could consider this as a bit of a win for the system, even though we couldn't quite get that 60 FPS experience we wanted. Now overall, the system ran great. It was a little bit of a shame in Doom Eternal because when we wanted to try and push up the settings in that one, unfortunately we couldn't do it because we were actually getting VRAM issues. It is one of the biggest shames when it comes to these types of graphics cards, because if you try to actually increase the graphics any further, knowing that the card can actually do it, the actual low VRAM in them will stop the game from actually starting, so that was a bit of a shame. But the one thing that we did see from this entire system configuration is that the components chosen actually are a great match with each other. There was no bottlenecking at all, or at least it didn't feel like it in any of the games that we tested, and when comparing to our previous entry, the system in terms of average FPSs was of course a little bit slower, but on the games where it actually sneaked ahead a little bit, the 1% low increases made all the difference. So I don't know about you guys, but I think WND Tech did an absolute fantastic job of this system. It is a well-balanced system that will pretty much play every single game in our test suite, although maybe not the greatest of averages here, but the 1% lows were fantastic, even in comparison to the previous system. Of course, this isn't a challenge if we don't have any types of leaderboards, and for those of you that watched the previous video, you will know that we run 2 leaderboards for this kind of thing. The first one will be a 6-game average on FPS, seeing who can get the maximum across all 6 games. And the second one is a price to performance one, giving those that maybe spent a little bit less an opportunity to climb up the board. When it came to overall performance, WND Tech's system managed to get an average of 75 frames per second across all 6 games. That actually puts him in second place due to Neddy in our previous video getting 85 frames per second. That's not bad considering what system he built, but it will mean that he's not going to take the leadership anytime soon. And then when it comes to price to performance, he also missed out here as well. Neddy's previous system cost around £1.70 per frame, whereas WND Tech's costs £1.96. I would actually suggest that that is mostly down to the fact of this graphics card only having 4GB of VRAM. If it was the 580 with 8GB, I think we would have seen a much better experience across the board, particularly when it came to those averages, because the VRAM was really the thing that let it down. The only game that really gave us warnings was of course Doom Eternal, but the other games would have suffered too, and it was clearly seen in the results that we got. Let me know in the comments below, did WND Tech do a decent job on this system, or would you have gone in a different direction? I want to thank him for taking part in this challenge. We will have more challenges coming forward. In fact, we've got the next one in production already, so make sure you subscribe to the channel if you want to catch that. And I'm sure as always, we'll catch you guys in the next one.